People like you are replaceable, Madison. Craig Ellsworth's voice cut through the glass conference room like a knife. Try to remember that. He tapped my performance report with his gold pen, each tap deliberate, mocking. The boardroom fell silent. 12 executives sat around that polished mahogany table, and not one of them met my eyes. Someone actually snickered. A woman in a navy suit whispered to the man beside her, loud enough for me to hear. Brutal. My chest tightened. Heat flooded my face. I stood there in my gray blazer and pencil skirt, the outfit I'd carefully chosen that morning, feeling completely exposed. Craig leaned back in his leather chair, arms crossed, wearing that smirk he saved for moments when he wanted you to know he'd won. My throat burned. My hands trembled at my sides. I forced myself to smile, that awful numb smile you make right before you shatter. Through the glass wall behind Craig, I could see his assistant arranging papers for his upcoming keynote speech. The same speech built entirely for my stolen work. My resignation email hit the press before his speech. But he didn't know that yet. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has traveled. My name is Madison Keene, and until that moment in the boardroom, I believed loyalty actually mattered in corporate America. I was 29 years old, a marketing strategist who'd clawed my way up from an unpaid internship to leading campaigns that brought in millions. I'd worked weekends, holidays, late nights that blurred into early mornings. I'd skipped vacations, canceled dates, postponed my entire life because I thought hard work would be recognized. I thought merit meant something. The thing about being underestimated is that nobody sees the climb. They only notice when you're standing at the top, and suddenly they want to push you off. That's what Craig had been doing for months, piece by piece, eroding everything I'd built. But sitting in my apartment that night after the boardroom humiliation, staring at my laptop screen, I realized something important. He'd made a critical mistake. He'd underestimated how much I knew, how carefully I'd documented everything, and how badly he'd violated his own policies. The company's ethics handbook sat open beside me, bookmarked to page 47. My resignation letter was already drafted. All I needed was the right moment to send it. 6 months earlier, I'd been standing in that same boardroom for entirely different reasons. I'd just closed the Riverside healthcare account, a $3.2 million deal that everyone said was impossible. The campaign I'd designed increased their patient engagement by 67% in just 3 months. I'd spent weeks perfecting that pitch, researching their pain points, crafting solutions that actually worked. When the contract was signed, Craig called an emergency board meeting. I thought it was to celebrate. I walked in nervous but excited, my presentation materials tucked under my arm. Craig stood at the head of the table and announced, "I'm proud to share the success of my strategic vision for the Riverside campaign." My strategic vision. My campaign. My 3 months of work. He didn't mention my name once during that 30-minute presentation. The board congratulated him. Someone suggested a bonus for his innovative approach. I stood against the back wall, invisible, while he took credit for every idea I'd created. When the meeting ended, I approached him quietly. "Craig, I think there was some confusion about." He cut me off with a hand gesture. "Madison, leadership is about knowing when to delegate and when to lead. You'll understand someday." Then he walked away. I convinced myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe he'd planned to credit me later. Maybe he forgot in the excitement. I replayed that moment for days, trying to make it make sense. My best friend, Angela, told me I was being naive. "He knew exactly what he was doing," she said over coffee. But I needed this job. I had student loans, rent in an expensive city, and a career I'd spent years building. So I swallowed my anger and kept working. 2 weeks after the Riverside meeting, Craig sent a company-wide email celebrating the campaign's success. The subject line read, "Leadership that delivers results." In 3 paragraphs about strategy, innovation, and bold decision-making, my name appeared exactly once, buried in the final sentence, with support from our talented team, including Madison Keene. Support. As if I'd been filing paperwork while he did the real work. People congratulated him in the hallways. Someone from finance stopped me and said, "Must be amazing working under such a visionary." I smiled and nodded, nausea rolling through my stomach. That night, I started keeping detailed records. Every email, every project file, every contribution I made. I labeled a folder on my laptop documentation and began backing everything up to a personal cloud drive.
I didn't know why yet.
Just instinct. Then there was Kyle Rowan. Kyle was Craig's favorite, a senior executive who somehow failed upward despite consistent incompetence. He'd been with the company for 8 years, riding on charm and Craig's protection. In meetings, Kyle threw out buzzwords without substance. He'd say things like, "We need to synergize our vertical integration," and people would nod as if he'd said something meaningful. But when it came to actual work, Kyle's campaigns consistently underperformed. His last 3 projects had missed targets by an average of 38%. Somehow, he never faced consequences. During a quarterly review meeting, Kyle presented analytics for a campaign he'd supposedly overseen. Within 5 minutes, I noticed his numbers didn't match our actual data. He'd inflated engagement rates by nearly 40% and completely misrepresented our return on investment. I raised my hand politely. "Kyle, I think there might be an error in slide 7. "Those metrics don't align with," Craig interrupted. "Madison, let's keep the flow going. You can send corrections later if needed." Kyle continued his presentation. The board approved his budget increase based on fraudulent data. After the meeting, Craig pulled me aside in the hallway. "Going forward, run any concerns through Kyle first before bringing them to my attention." "But the data was wrong," I said. "Kyle will handle it." His tone left no room for argument. Kyle called me into his office the next day. He sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, trying to look authoritative. "Craig thinks you're getting too much attention," he said bluntly. "It's making some people uncomfortable." I stared at him. "Too much attention for doing my job well? You need to understand office dynamics.
Play small for a while.
Let others shine." His voice carried a warning I couldn't ignore. I left his office understanding exactly what was happening. Craig felt threatened. My competence highlighted his mediocrity, so he was systematically dismantling my visibility. It wasn't about performance.
It was about ego.
I went home that night and updated my documentation folder. I added Kyle's comments, time-stamped and detailed. I also started looking at my employment contract more carefully. Buried in Section 12, Clause 14, I found something interesting. All work product must be appropriately credited when presented to board members or external stakeholders. Craig had violated this policy repeatedly. The contract also outlined specific procedures for reporting ethics violations. I bookmarked the page and kept reading. Knowledge, I was learning, could be its own form of power. 3 months before the boardroom humiliation, Craig introduced a new policy during a staff meeting. Effective immediately, he announced, any resignation or complaint filed by employees in leadership positions will be automatically flagged for board review. He explained it was part of enhanced corporate governance, ensuring transparency and protecting employee rights. The policy required that such resignations be logged in the company's compliance system, which would trigger automatic notifications to our legal team, the board secretary, and our PR department's monitoring list. Most people barely paid attention. It seemed like standard corporate bureaucracy, but I took notes. I noted especially that Craig himself had championed this policy, presenting it as his commitment to ethical leadership. He'd even added specific keywords that would trigger the system, terms like misrepresentation, credit attribution, and ethics violation. At the time, I thought it was performative nonsense. Craig loved creating policies that made him look principled while doing whatever he wanted behind closed doors. I had no idea this policy would become the exact mechanism of his downfall. Sometimes karma doesn't need your help. It just needs you to pay attention long enough to see how people build their own traps. 2 months before the disaster, Craig removed me from the Westmont pitch. Westmont Industries was our biggest potential client of the year, a deal worth approximately $6 million. I'd been developing the strategy for 4 months, researching their market position, identifying their needs, crafting a campaign that would revolutionize their brand presence. Then, during a routine check-in meeting, Craig said casually, "I'm reassigning the Westmont presentation to Kyle." I felt my stomach drop. "Craig, I've been building this pitch for months. I know every detail of—" "Kyle needs a win," he interrupted. "You've had plenty of opportunities. Time to be a team player." A team player. I'd carried this team for years while Kyle coasted on incompetence and connections. But arguing would only make things worse. I handed over my files, watching 4 months of work disappear into Kyle's undeserving hands. Kyle presented my pitch 2 weeks later. He stumbled through the slides I'd created, mispronouncing key terms, fumbling basic questions. Westmont's executives looked unimpressed. "We didn't get the contract." Craig blamed the presentation's lack of cohesive vision. He never mentioned Kyle's name. In the following department meeting, he said, "This loss reminds us that we can't rely on inherited strategies. We need original thinking." He was talking about my work, calling it inherited while he sat there having stolen it himself. My badge access changed without warning. I discovered it one morning when I tried entering the executive floor for a scheduled meeting. The security reader flashed red.
Denied.
I tried again.
Red.
A security guard approached, apologetic but firm. "Miss Keene, your access was modified yesterday. You're cleared for floors 3 through 5 only." "There must be a mistake. I have a meeting with. You'll need to contact HR about access changes." I stood there in the lobby, humiliated, while colleagues walked past me into the elevator I could no longer access. I checked my calendar on my phone. 3 meetings had vanished. Events I'd organized, presentations I was supposed to give, all deleted from my schedule as if they'd never existed. This wasn't random. This was methodical. Craig was erasing me systematically, one access point at a time. I went to my desk and opened my documentation folder. I added this incident with screenshots showing my calendar before and after. I documented the badge access change with the exact timestamp. Then I checked something I'd been monitoring quietly for weeks. Craig's shared folder, which he'd accidentally given me edit access to months ago and never revoked. Inside, I found a document titled Restructuring Plan Q4. My name appeared in red text under Phase Out, Strategic Redundancy Removal. Craig called me to his office on a Friday afternoon. His assistant had sent a cryptic calendar invite. Performance discussion. No agenda, no preparation materials, just those 2 ominous words. I walked into his office with my notebook and my carefully maintained composure. He gestured to the chair across from his desk without looking up from his computer. I sat and waited while he typed, making me feel small through deliberate silence. Finally, he closed his laptop and folded his hands. "Madison, I've been reviewing your contributions, and I have some concerns about your initiative level." Initiative level. I'd been carrying entire campaigns while Kyle coasted and Craig took credit. "I'm not sure I understand," I said carefully. "You seem comfortable doing assigned work, but lack the strategic thinking necessary for advancement. You follow directions well, but don't anticipate needs." Each word was carefully chosen to undermine me without providing specific actionable feedback. This wasn't coaching. This was groundwork for dismissal. He slid a paper across his desk. "I'm implementing a new reporting structure. You'll now route all projects through Kyle for approval and guidance before presenting to me." Kyle, who couldn't correctly read a basic analytics report. A Kyle who'd bombed the Westmont pitch I'd built. "This will help you develop leadership perspective," Craig continued. I forced myself to nod. "I understand."
Good.
"I'm glad you're being professional about this." That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight this in a way Craig expected. I wasn't going to storm into HR with complaints he'd already preemptively discredited. I wasn't going to send angry emails or make scenes in meetings. Instead, I was going to use the system he'd built against him. I opened my employment contract and read every single clause. I reviewed the ethics policy handbook cover to cover. I studied the company's board governance documents, which were publicly available on our investor relations website. And I found the architecture of my revenge in Policy 12.3. All work presented to the board or external stakeholders must include proper attribution to contributing employees. Failure to comply constitutes ethics violation and may result in leadership review. Craig had violated this policy at least 7 times in the past 6 months, with documented evidence. His new compliance policy meant any resignation citing these violations would automatically trigger a board investigation. The genius of it was that he'd created this system himself. He'd built the trap, set the mechanisms, and written the rules. I just needed to activate it at exactly the right moment for maximum impact. I started drafting my resignation email, choosing every word with surgical precision. No emotion, no accusations, just facts, timestamps, and policy references. Professional, devastating, and legally bulletproof. 2 weeks before everything collapsed, Craig invited me to observe a board meeting. Not present, not contribute, observe. The invitation came via email with the subject line, Board Meeting Guest Attendance. The meeting was scheduled for the same day Craig would be giving his keynote address at the National Marketing Summit. He'd been preparing for months, building his speech around what he called visionary leadership in modern marketing. I'd seen the draft slides. They featured case studies from campaigns I'd created. My strategies, my data, my innovations, all presented as his insights. The board meeting invitation felt wrong. My instinct screamed that this was a setup. But I needed witnesses to whatever Craig was planning. If he was going to make a move against me, I wanted it documented in front of the company's highest authority. I accepted the invitation. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed running scenarios, trying to predict his play. Would he announce my dismissal? Publicly demote me? Blame me for Kyle's failures? I revised my resignation email one final time, making sure every reference was accurate, every timestamp verified, every policy citation correct. Then I set it up to send the moment I pressed one button. I just needed the right trigger. The right moment when his arrogance was at its peak and his guard was completely down. The boardroom was exactly as cold as I remembered. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. 12 executives sat in expensive chairs around that massive mahogany table. Craig stood at the head like a king addressing his court. I was told to sit against the back wall, apart from the table, clearly positioned as an observer with no voice. Craig began his presentation. Today, I want to share the strategic vision that's driven our recent successes. He clicked to the first slide. It showed the Riverside Healthcare campaign results. My campaign. My data. My strategy. Not once did he mention my name. He walked through 3 more campaigns, each one my work, presented as his leadership genius. Board members nodded approvingly. Someone commented on his innovative approach. I sat there in silence, watching him steal credit for everything I'd built. Then he pulled out a report, and my stomach dropped. However, he said gravely, I want to address some concerns about our team structure moving forward. He looked directly at me. Madison, could you stand, please? My legs barely held me as I stood. We've been evaluating performance metrics across departments, he continued, his voice carrying that false concern that made my skin crawl. Some team members are struggling to meet the standards we expect for future growth. He tapped my performance report with his gold pen. Each tap was deliberate. Mocking. People like you are replaceable, Madison. Try to remember that. The room stayed silent. 12 people who should have questioned him, who should have recognized his cruelty, just sat there. Someone snickered. The woman in the navy suit whispered, brutal. Craig smiled, that same smirk I'd seen dozens of times when he thought he'd won. Try not to cry, he added. It's unprofessional. Something inside me snapped, but not in the way he expected. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop hoping someone will be better than they are. I smiled, forced but steady, and said, Thank you for your feedback. Then I walked out of that boardroom with my head high. Behind me, I heard Craig resume his presentation as if humiliating an employee in front of the board was just routine business. I went straight to the women's restroom and locked myself in a stall. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone. The rage I'd been suppressing for months threatened to explode. But I couldn't afford to lose control now. I had one chance to do this right. I took 3 deep breaths, opened my email, and checked one final detail. Craig had forwarded my entire project folder to himself exactly 10 minutes before the board meeting. The timestamp was there in my email logs. He'd stolen my work right before publicly calling me replaceable. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My makeup was still perfect. My hair still neat. I looked exactly like the composed professional I'd always been. But inside, I was done playing by rules that only protected people like Craig. I dried my hands and pulled out my phone. My resignation email was already drafted, saved in my personal email account, ready to send. I'd been refining it for 2 weeks, making sure every sentence was professional, factual, and devastating. The email opened with a simple statement. Effective immediately, I am resigning from my position as marketing strategist at TechVista Solutions. Then came 3 paragraphs of carefully documented facts. Each campaign I'd led with specific dates and measurable results. Each instance where credit was misattributed in board presentations, with timestamps and policy violations cited. Each time Craig had violated company ethics policies, specifically Section 12.3 of the Governance Handbook. I'd attached supporting documentation, email threads, project files with creation dates, presentation slides showing original authorship. Everything was time-stamped, verified, and legally sound. The email didn't accuse. It simply stated facts and referenced policies Craig himself had written. At the bottom, I'd included one critical paragraph. Per company policy on leadership resignations, this communication triggers automatic compliance review as outlined in Memorandum CR 7-49, implemented by CEO Craig Ellsworth on March 15th. I read the email one final time, my finger hovering over the send button. This wasn't just a resignation. This was a tactical strike designed to activate the compliance system Craig had built. Once I sent this email, it would automatically flag keywords he'd mandated: misrepresentation, ethics violation, credit attribution. The system would forward my resignation to the legal department, the board secretary, and the PR monitoring list within minutes. Multiple people would see Craig's policy violations before he even knew I'd resigned. The beauty of it was that I wasn't breaking any rules. I was following exactly the procedures Craig himself had implemented. His own policy, his own keywords, his own compliance system. He'd built the machine that would destroy him. I thought about that moment in the boardroom. His smirk.
His cruelty.
The way he'd humiliated me in front of people who should have defended me. Then I thought about every person he'd done this to before me, and everyone he'd do it to after if nobody stopped him. My hand steadied. I pressed send. The email disappeared from my drafts and entered the company system. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then my phone buzzed. An automatic reply from the compliance system. Your communication has been logged as a board impact event and forwarded to relevant stakeholders per company policy CR 7-49. It was done. The countdown had started. Craig had maybe 20 minutes before his world started falling apart. I walked back to my desk calmly, as if nothing had happened. Colleagues were scattered throughout the office, focused on their work, unaware that I'd just activated a corporate nuclear option. My desk was neat, organized, ready for me to simply walk away. I'd been preparing for this moment without fully realizing it. I logged into my computer and cleared my browser history out of habit. Then I opened my personal email on my phone and watched the automated responses start rolling in. 9:47 a.m. Compliance system. Resignation logged. Board notification sent. 9:48 a.m. Legal department. Receipt confirmed. Documentation under review. 9:51 a.m. Board secretary. Emergency review requested. Senior leadership will be notified. Each automated response was a domino falling exactly as I'd predicted. The system Craig designed to protect his image was now documenting his misconduct with mechanical precision. At 9:53 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, another call. Craig's assistant. I declined it. A text message appeared. Urgent. Mr. Ellsworth needs to speak with you immediately regarding your email. I didn't respond. I simply sat at my desk, watching my phone light up with increasingly frantic attempts to reach me. Let him panic. Let him feel what it's like when the ground disappears beneath you without warning. By 10:05 a.m., my phone had 17 missed calls. The office around me continued its normal rhythm, but I could see confusion starting to spread. Craig's assistant rushed past my desk toward the executive floor, her face pale. Two people from legal walked quickly toward the boardroom, carrying tablets and folders. Something was happening, and people were starting to notice. At 10:12 a.m., I received an email from someone I didn't expect. Marcus Webb, the board member who'd always seemed slightly uncomfortable with Craig's presentations. The subject line read, "Clarification needed urgent." The email was brief. "Miss Keene, I've received your resignation notification through our compliance system. The documentation you've attached requires immediate board discussion. Can you confirm the accuracy of these timestamps and project attributions? We need to address this before Mr. Ellsworth's keynote presentation this afternoon." I replied within 60 seconds, "Mr. Webb, every detail in my resignation is accurate and verifiable through company systems. I'm happy to provide any additional documentation the board requires. All project files include original creation dates and authorship metadata. I stand by every statement made." I copied legal department on my response. By 10:20 a.m., the emergency was escalating. I watched through glass walls as Craig was pulled out of a meeting. His face was red, his jaw tight. He was surrounded by 3 people from legal and someone I recognized as the head of our PR department. Craig looked directly at me through the glass walls separating our spaces. Even from 30 feet away, I could see the rage in his eyes. He knew. He finally understood what I'd done. But it was too late. The machine was already running, and he couldn't stop it. His assistant appeared at my desk, breathless. "Madison, Mr. Ellsworth needs to speak with you right now. It's urgent." "I'm no longer an employee of this company," I said calmly. "My resignation was effective immediately. Please, this is important. There's been some kind of misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding. Everything in my resignation is documented and accurate." She looked panicked, glancing back toward where Craig stood in heated discussion with legal. He's supposed to give his keynote speech in 2 hours. There are 300 people registered. Industry press will be there. He needs. That's not my concern anymore. My voice was steady, professional, final. She left, nearly running back to deliver news Craig didn't want to hear. I gathered my personal items methodically. My framed photo with Angela. My company awards that felt hollow now. The coffee mug with our company logo. Everything fit into one small box. At 10:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with an email from an investor I'd never communicated with directly. Maxwell Chun from Redstone Capital, one of our largest financial backers. "Miss Keene, I've received concerning information through board channels regarding project attribution and leadership conduct. Can you verify the accuracy of campaign metrics cited in recent investor presentations? This requires clarification before we can proceed with Q4 funding discussions." The investors were asking questions now. Craig's carefully constructed image was developing cracks visible to the people who mattered most, the ones with money. I forwarded Maxwell Chen's email to the legal department with a simple response. All investor presentation data should be verified against original project files and metadata. I recommend a complete audit of campaign attribution over the past 12 months. I was burning it down so carefully that nobody could accuse me of sabotage. I was simply telling the truth and letting the consequences unfold naturally. At 11:15 a.m., Craig's keynote presentation was officially postponed. An email went out to all registered attendees. Due to unforeseen internal matters requiring immediate attention, Craig Ellsworth's presentation at the National Marketing Summit has been rescheduled. We apologize for any inconvenience. The industry press would smell blood in the water. A CEO suddenly canceling a major keynote hours before speaking always meant crisis. My phone buzzed with a text from Angela. "What is happening?" "People are saying Craig's speech was canceled, and there's some emergency board meeting. Are you okay?" I texted back. "I'm fine. I quit this morning. I'll explain everything tonight. At 11:33 a.m., I was formally asked to stay for a board meeting at 2 p.m. The request came from the board secretary, professional but urgent. Miss Keene, the board requests your presence this afternoon to discuss matters raised in your resignation. Your cooperation would be greatly appreciated. I agreed to attend the 2 p.m. meeting. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to watch Craig's world collapse in real time. I wanted to sit in that same boardroom where he'd humiliated me and watch him face consequences for once in his entitled life. I spent the next 2 hours in a conference room with legal, walking them through every document I'd referenced. They asked careful questions, taking notes, verifying timestamps. A lawyer named Patricia Chen reviewed my employment contract clause by clause. This attribution policy is very clear, she said, almost to herself. And you're certain Mr. Ellsworth presented these campaigns as his own strategic development. I have 7 documented instances with board meeting recordings and presentation files, I replied. The metadata shows I created every strategy, every slide, every data analysis he claimed as his vision. And he removed you from projects you originated? After I refused to falsify data for Kyle Rowan's presentation in August. Patricia looked up sharply. You were asked to falsify data? Kyle's analytics were inflated by 38%. When I tried to correct them in the meeting, Craig told me to run all concerns through Kyle first. 2 days later, Kyle told me to play small because Craig thought I was getting too much attention. Patricia took extensive notes. This was bigger than credit theft now. This was potential fraud that could affect investor relations and regulatory compliance. The 2 p.m. board meeting felt different from this morning's humiliation. This time, I sat at the table. Craig sat at the opposite end, his expensive suit somehow looking wrinkled, his confident posture deflated. The 12 board members who'd watched him mock me this morning now looked at him with suspicion. Marcus Webb opened the meeting. We've spent the past 3 hours reviewing documentation provided by Miss Keene and verified through our system records. The findings are deeply concerning. He pulled up a presentation on the screen behind him. My campaigns. My data. My work. Each slide showed original creation metadata with my name, followed by board presentations where Craig claimed authorship. Mr. Ellsworth, can you explain why work product created by Miss Keene was consistently presented to this board as your strategic development? Craig's jaw tightened. I oversaw these projects as CEO. Leadership means guiding vision. The attribution policy requires specific credit for individual contributors, Marcus interrupted. You didn't guide these campaigns. According to metadata and email records, you weren't involved in their development at all until presenting them as your own work. Another board member, a woman named Victoria Ashford, spoke up. We've also reviewed the compliance footage from this morning's meeting. Your comments to Miss Keene were inappropriate at best, potentially constituting workplace harassment. I was providing performance feedback, Craig said, his voice tight. You called her replaceable in front of the entire board, Victoria said coldly. After presenting her work as yours. The meeting continued for 90 minutes. Craig tried defending himself, but every explanation collapsed under documented evidence. Email threads showed he'd deliberately excluded me from meetings about my own projects. Calendar records proved he'd changed my access without cause. Financial data revealed he'd approved budget increases for Kyle based on falsified metrics I'd tried to correct. By 3:45 p.m., the board's decision was clear. Marcus Webb delivered it with the same flat tone Craig had used on me that morning. Mr. Ellsworth, effective immediately, you're placed on administrative leave pending a complete investigation. You'll have no access to company facilities or systems. We'll be appointing an interim CEO by end of business today. Craig's face went white. You're suspending me? Based on the complaints of one disgruntled employee. Based on documented policy violations, potential fraud, and workplace misconduct, Victoria corrected. Your access credentials will be deactivated within the hour. Please surrender your company devices and security badge before leaving the building. I watched him stand, his movements stiff with barely controlled rage. He looked at me once, and I held his gaze steadily. No satisfaction. No gloating. just the calm certainty that actions have consequences. As security escorted him out, Marcus turned to me. Miss Keene, we understand you've resigned, but we'd like to discuss options for you to reconsider. Your contributions to this company are clearly significant, and we failed to recognize that under Mr. Ellsworth's leadership. I declined their offer politely. I appreciate the board's recognition, but I've already accepted a position elsewhere. It wasn't entirely true yet, but it would be soon. That evening, as I walked out of TechVista's headquarters for the last time, my phone buzzed with a message. Nicholas Torres, VP of Marketing at Innovate Dynamics, one of our biggest competitors. Madison, I've been following your work for the past year. Particularly impressed by the Riverside Healthcare campaign and your strategic approach to digital transformation. We have a director position opening, and I think you'd be perfect. Interested in discussing it over coffee tomorrow? I smiled and replied, very interested. Tomorrow at 10 works perfectly. That night, the story broke. A business journalist named Andrew Castellano published an article titled, TechVista CEO Suspended Hours Before Major Keynote Amid Internal Ethics Investigation. The piece was carefully worded, citing unnamed sources about a significant employee resignation that triggered compliance, review of leadership conduct, and project attribution practices. My name wasn't mentioned, but industry insiders would figure it out quickly. Angela called me at 9 p.m., practically shouting, "You took down Craig Ellsworth." Holy shit, Madison, it's all over LinkedIn. People are speculating about who filed the complaint. This is incredible. I just documented the truth, I said. He built his own trap. I just showed people where to look. You're a legend. Seriously. Every woman who's ever been undermined by a mediocre man is celebrating right now. 3 weeks later, I sat in my new office at Innovate Dynamics with a title that reflected my actual contributions, Director of Strategic Marketing. The salary was 40% higher than TechVista had paid me. The team respected my expertise. Nobody took credit for my work. Craig Ellsworth's fall had been complete and public. The board investigation revealed more misconduct than even I'd documented, including financial irregularities and multiple other employees he'd systematically undermined. He was terminated with cause, losing his severance package and stock options. The industry press coverage was brutal. Kyle Rowan quietly resigned before the investigation reached him. Andrew Castellano published a follow-up piece about toxic leadership and the importance of proper attribution in corporate settings. This time, my name was mentioned as someone who'd courageously documented misconduct through proper channels. I received 3 job offers in 2 weeks. This morning, I saw Craig's LinkedIn profile. His CEO title was gone, replaced with seeking new opportunities. His polished headshot looked the same, but everything else had changed. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Sometimes the loudest revenge is choosing yourself and letting arrogance do the rest. I looked out my office window at the city below, sunlight reflecting off glass towers. For the first time in years, I felt light.
Free. Valued.
Replaceable, he'd called me. Turns out, he was the one nobody needed after all. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you found yourself in such situation? Please share below and subscribe to this channel for more stories like mine.